Hello, and welcome to our On Target teletraining series. I'm Andrea Kern, the founder of Big Bark, which of course you know is your online source for everything big dog. Alicia Evans is joining us to share her knowledge of big dog health issues and wellness practices. Tonight we are discussing a hot topic for big dog parents, nutrition. So let's go ahead and get started. Alicia, can you tell us about what you know about and how you look at nutrition for big dogs?
Yeah, nutrition is like a huge factor in so many things. I know it's just sort of something, we go to the vet or we go to our pet store or we've had a dog before and we kind of say, okay, I'm going to feed them what I've been feeding them or I'm going to feed them what the vet says to feed them. But I have a really different take on nutrition because when I look at nutrition, I'm looking from the standpoint that a dog and a wolf are basically, and this is scientifically proven, they're only 1.5% different. So if they're 1.5% different, and a wolf would eat, raw meat, they would eat primarily a lot of moisture is in their food because there's just a lot of fluids in the body that come within the meat itself. So they'd be getting like 70 to 80% moisture, about 35 to 40% protein in a raw form. They would be getting raw fat, about 30% of that. They'd have bones, to chew on for their teeth. They'd also have live enzymes, which are inside the stomach content of the animal that they would kill. And any roughage that they get, any kind of grains or anything of that nature, would already be predigested. So when I look at the difference between that and the typical, dry food that comes in a bag that can last, it's probably been on the shelf at least 6 months, and then, we get it, and it probably lasts us like a month or two, depending on the size of the bag we buy. It really is something that's a really crucial factor in your dog's behavior, in your dog's mindset, in their health, and really, how they are able to interact in the world. And to me, it's so amazing because there's such a little difference between the two. It's amazing how differently we feed dogs and how they've been able to stay somewhat as healthy as they have. But I think we're starting to notice more and more that even at younger ages, many, many more dogs are becoming ill at younger ages. So when you're looking at nutrition, you really want to come down to kind of like the basics. Even if you feed your dog dry food, my general recommendation is that you add in wet food. Like I think every single dog on the planet should be on wet food because in nature, there's so much more moisture content in the foods that they're eating that if you just make that one shift of awareness, like, hey, if I have a puppy or I have a large breed growing puppy, I'm going to make sure I probably put about 45 to 55% of their food should be either home cooked, like proteins like chicken or turkey or fish, or utilize the canned foods because it just makes such a difference. If you think about a puppy on dry food is kind of like feeding your kid corn chips every single day and then hoping that their brain develops properly, hoping that their organs develop properly. The thing is, they really need fat. And, they need a good percentage of fat and they need a good percentage of moisture in their diet. So as they're growing, and we know that obviously big dogs grow a lot bigger, a lot faster than most other breeds, you want to make sure they have that fortification of nutrition in their system because as puppies, they've got so much energy, but you just want to make sure that they're also getting the proper balance of nutrition. So, one of my primary things that I really indicate in looking at nutrition is if you do nothing else, just the one step of adding at least half of your dog's food in as wet food will make a huge difference in how they develop and how they grow, in their level of calmness, in their level of brain activity. And also, the brain actually needs fat to relax. So if you've got a puppy that's like super hyper and you're just on dry food, watch what happens as you start to add in wet. It makes a very, very big difference.
Well, that's interesting. So what is the best way to determine the most supportive diet for our dog or puppy?
The way that I tend to do that, and this kind of came about with working with animals that were sick, I always go back to what's the breed, where would they live, and what kind of foods, because remember, before dog foods were invented, put in bags to make it convenient for people in the cities, most of the dogs lived out on farms. So when you look at what kind of breed you have, where their natural heritage starts, and what kind of farm they would have been on, and what kind of food they would eat, kind of like when you get into like the the St. Bernards, and you get into the Berners, and you get into the Newfies, I have found that those guys kind of actually require a lot more fat in their diet, because think about what a lot of those guys would be eating. They'd probably be eating like mutton, or they'd be eating salmon, or they'd be getting milk, fresh from the farm. So their diets would really be a lot higher in fat than most dogs, because most of them would be out in cold weather. Most of them would be out protecting herds, so they'd be out in the cold weather a lot, and their bodies actually require the extra fat and the nutrition. So when I look at how best to feed, I always start with what breed do you have, what's their heritage in terms of where they would live, and then also too, what work would they be doing, and what would be the most natural diet that would come off, usually obviously if they were living on a farm, they get a lot of scraps of food because there wasn't, all the bagged dog food yet. So that's really where I start as my basis for how and what am I going to feed my dog. Because so many times, I have clients too, they go, God, I went into the pet store and it's just so overwhelming, because there's so many dog food companies out there now. And the good news is that the quality of a lot of these foods are getting a lot better. They're taking a lot of the preservatives out of the foods that have been in them that were actually giving dogs cancer and, getting them sick. So that's a good part of it. But the other part, in order to sort of arm yourself when you go into the store, really, most of the people that have large breed dogs, they know the kind of dog that they have. They kind of know their heritage. So I would just, really offer, research it a little bit more. And when you go to look for foods in the store, a couple things that you want to look for, especially with the larger breeds, is you're going to want to look for a little bit higher of a fat content. That's also why I recommend adding in the wet food, because you're going to get much more fat in wet food than you are in a dry kibble. You make sure it's got enough moisture in it. Most kibbles, if you read the label, pretty much on any kibble, it's going to say 12% moisture. Dogs in the wild would be eating 70 to 80% moisture. And it's really critical that they kind of get it intracellularly, because it's not like just, okay, here's dry food and I'll add water to it. They actually need it through the food, because when they eat the food that's got the moisture contained in it, it actually enters the cells differently, and it actually absorbs differently, where if they're just drinking water because they're thirsty and because, we're thinking, well, that's enough hydration for them, the problem is that the way that water goes, it goes right into the kidneys. So it's like constantly having to almost like flush your toilet bowl, and you don't want an animal's kidneys to work that hard. So first look at where your dog lived, where's their heritage, what would they be eating naturally, and then pick the foods that really have kind of like the highest quality fats, the highest quality moisture, and mix your wet and your dry foods together. You will see a major, major difference. And if you have an older dog, or a dog that's, let's say, hitting like 4, 5, 6, 7, not only will you see an improvement in coat and the brightness of eye quality, I've changed arthritis in dogs in about a week just by adding in wet foods. So it's not just for puppies. I kind of am a big believer in making sure that you do that all throughout the time. The other thing that I'd really suggest too, when you look at the labels and you decide on what you want to give your dog, a lot of the companies now are starting to mix a lot of the different proteins. So they'll kind of put like chicken and beef and duck and lamb, like all in one constitution. I kind of advise against that because, again, going back to nature, if you saw a wolf is not going to kill a deer and then kill a duck and then, kill a rabbit and then kill an ostrich and put all that together. It's one animal at a time, and it's one protein source at a time. So if that protein source happens to be mixed, let's just say I happen to like Natural Balance, has a really great fish and sweet potato formula. It's just fish and it's sweet potato. I kind of find that the simpler that you stay, the better off that you are. Because the more complex that you get with your dog having, with their body trying to synthesize all these different proteins at once, I think that it actually makes for a weakened stomach. So that's kind of my recommendation over watching the dogs on these different foods and making sure that whatever you're feeding in terms of a dry food, like let's say you pick a lamb-based dry food, I would also pick a lamb-based wet food to go with it. And then if you're going to change, and I do recommend, when I was growing up and I had dogs, the vet was like, don't ever change your dog's food. The dog has to have the same exact food all the time, or you could screw up their stomach. Well, yeah, you could screw up their stomach, but the problem is if you feed the dog the same thing all the time, there is no product on the market that really is going to give your dog every single thing it needs for the rest of its life. So I always kind of recommend, like every 6 months or so, to start, varying your dog's food. Maybe change the dry food that you're feeding to a different formulation, and also change the wet food to a different formulation. And I just say that because I've seen a lot of dogs that have been only on one food like forever, and then they're starting to get sick. You go to change their food, and all of a sudden now they've got diarrhea or they've got mucus on their stool. A lot of that happens because the food that they're eating on a consistent basis tends to start to form and build up plaque in the system, much like, how a human starts to develop like heart disease or I think it's arteriosclerosis in the actual arteries. The same things actually happen with our dogs. So we want to make sure we're kind of giving them a variety every 3 to 6 months. This will also make sure that what one food does not cover, in terms of it might have like 1 or 2 missing ingredients that your dog might need, the next bag of food in all likelihood will have it. So I've always found that as I rotate with the foods, I've got healthier dogs that feel good, that have much less chance of getting sick, and you can just see it in their body, you can see it in their coat, and you can see it in their eyes.
Okay, so if you change your dog's food, sometimes I know my dogs they're picky about what they'll eat. Mm-hmm. So how do you know whether your dog is just being picky or if they're being discerning?
Well, I don't really think that there's such a thing as a picky dog. I really don't. I think that there's definitely picky cats.
Yeah.
But I don't think that, I think if it's just a total oxymoron to look at picky in a dog, because the one thing that we don't get is a dog's sense of smell is over 10,000 times stronger than ours. So what we don't recognize is that even though we think, we're feeding them the best food and this is what the bag said and this is what the person at the store said, the one being that knows better than anybody else about what's best for them is the dog. And I learned this when I had my golden retriever and my chocolate lab. And I would watch my chocolate lab go around this huge field, and I would watch him sniff the different flowers. And what I found fascinating, because I would have thought, okay, he's sniffing flowers. What difference is he going to know? That dog would only eat certain things. And the reason why it fascinated me was because this dog would eat anything. I mean, you could give him anything and he would eat it. But yet when he went outside, he was very, very discerning about what he was picking out in terms of flowers to eat. So I've kind of come to really realize that dogs know better than anybody else what's in their best interest for them to be eating. And while we think it's like, oh my God, you're being so picky, you're a dog, dogs are really just trying to keep themselves healthy. So when they won't eat something, it's generally because there is either something lacking in that particular food. Could be, an amino acid. It could be, a certain source of fat that they need. The other thing is they might not feel like that's the source of protein they need at the moment. And the perfect example of that is my dachshund. I mean, that dog will, if he was just being picky, eventually he'd get hungry and he'd eat. But I have put down filet mignon in front of that dog when he does not want filet mignon, but he wants chicken. He'll leave it all night. He won't even touch it. So a lot of what we kind of tend to look at as picky, I would actually say is really discernment from the dog's point of view. And I've given him foods where he wouldn't eat it unless I put a particular supplement on it. As soon as I put the supplement on it, he'd eat it. And I've never seen that in dogs before because I've always had labs and golden retrievers, and those dogs will eat. They'll eat your shoe if you put it in their bowl. They'll just be like, okay, I can eat that too. So to see the difference and to recognize how intelligent they are to the point of this isn't going to work for my body right now, but if I add something different, they go, oh, okay, that'll work. It's amazing to me. It's really, really amazing to me to watch because this dog knows better than anybody else how to keep his own body in balance. So I would just kind of say, like, if your dogs are being picky, then I would start to look at potentially either are you familiar with muscle testing, like kinesiology testing, like what the chiropractors do?
Yeah, a little. I mean, I don't have a extensive knowledge.
Okay. There's a really, really simple technique I use, and I just kind of use my fingers. And so I'll kind of take, like, let's say I'm up my right hand, and I'll take my right middle finger, and I'll put it on top of the nail of my right index finger, so it sort of crosses over it and on top. Mm-hmm. And I'll ask a question, and if it's a yes, my middle finger cannot push down my index finger. If it's a no, my index finger goes straight down. So it's a process that kind of takes a little bit of practice of just getting used to kind of getting your mind out of the way and asking questions. But I love to do muscle testing because I have found such a high success rate that when I ask the animal's body and it gives me the information we need to make sure that we nourish that animal properly, it is amazing to me how accurate it is. So basically the way I start to teach people how to do it is, start with simple yes questions. Like if you have your right middle finger, the pad of it over your right fingernail on your index finger, just ask yourself, is your name blank? And say your name. See what happens when you go to press your finger down. If it's a yes, you will not be able to push the index finger down. If it's a no, you will. So now ask yourself the question, is my name, and then pick another name. How did that work?
I don't think I'm doing it right.
No? Okay. So just take a deep breath for a sec. Just clear your mind of everything. And because sometimes also what we do is we tend to go into our head, and we tend to think that, like, anytime we ask a question, our brain is going to be what answers. But, we kind of forget. Sometimes we have a lot of stuff on our mind. We've got a lot of, sometimes we have just conflicting awarenesses of certain things. So just completely clear your mind, kind of let it go blank, and then ask the question. Like for you, you're going to say, is my name Andrea? And for everyone else on the call, ask what your name is and see if your finger is able to push down. And then ask the question and use another name. Is my name and then give a name that's not your name. Does that work at all?
Yeah, I guess a little, yeah.
Okay.
I think I'm thinking about it too much, honestly.
Exactly. And the good thing is you can always feel free to call somebody like me if you need, your dog muscle tested, to see which are the right foods and what's going to be the best balance for their body. But that's just kind of like a really simple way and a simple technique that I use. The other thing, because I also do animal communication, a lot of the times I'll actually ask my dog, before I put out food, like, what do you want to eat? And I'll get a pretty clear indication from him. I'll hear like either turkey or chicken or beef. And so it really makes it a lot easier to be able to hear him, and this way we, have a lot less incidents with wasted food. So you can always just play with it and practice with it. Even though as humans we've kind of been taught animals can't talk, we can't talk to the animals, we actually can, and they can talk back. So just kind of play around with it and practice, and just from your mind to their mind, ask them what they want to eat and see what you hear. And then put it out and see if you were right.
Okay, so a lot of, like, if we get a puppy from a breeder and sometimes from shelters, they just recommend, like, a high-quality, dry, kind of beneficial, like diet. Do you think that that's actually beneficial at all or not for big dogs?
Like I said, dogs have been living on it and have really modified themselves for a really long time for the dry foods. Again, just in my opinion, you can feed dry food. The problem, though, is that in the short term, it might be okay. In the long term, you are going to see, as we are kind of seeing as a broad spectrum of dogs across the board, dogs are getting sicker at younger and younger ages with really, really intense diseases. And the interesting thing is that most of these things can easily be adjusted and easily be prevented by following a better diet for them. And that's really why I always recommend the wet food, because, I know that it's become so commonplace. You go into any pet store and there's bags and bags and bags of dry food, right? That's just what we've been conditioned to feed our dogs. But the thing that I tend to say is, where would you go in nature when all of a sudden you would see the wolves or the coyotes or the foxes sitting around a fire cooking up kibble? Just wouldn't see it, right?
Right.
So that's where I always go back to. So, if the balance of things has been, okay, it's been working for a while, the issue that's coming up, though, now is that, well, it might be at that point where it's not working so great anymore because of the incidences that we're starting to see in all kinds of, I almost call them more human-type diseases that are showing up in our dogs at younger and younger and younger ages. Think back to even 20 or 30 years ago. It was like almost unheard of that you actually have your dog's teeth done, or doggy dental. It wasn't any kind of field. Now it's like this huge emerging field. And one of the biggest problems with diets, when you cook food past 118 degrees, you kill all the live enzymes that help to break down the food at the beginning of the digestive process. So dogs' bodies are naturally more acidic than humans, but because they needed their digestive system in eating raw foods was supposed to work on 4 to 6 hours. Okay, so in 4 to 6 hours, they were supposed to complete the digestion cycle to avoid like bacteria or botulism or salmonella. Now we have them on these dry foods. The dry foods take anywhere from 10 to 14 hours to digest, which means our dogs are constantly, their stomachs and their digestive systems are constantly working harder and harder and longer to pull out the same amount of nutrients that they would, if they were on a more raw diet or if they were on even like a home-cooked diet. Now, the problem with the enzymes is that when you run out of those, because there's a certain amount that you have in your body, but the way nature designed things was that great. You'll have the ones that you need in your body, plus you'll get ones from food, and that will help keep the digestive system running pretty normally, because what they do is they are responsible for like the pre-breakdown of food before it gets into the stomach, because once it gets into the stomach, that's when hydrochloric acid is secreted to break down the rest of the food to be totally digested. But when you don't have the enzymes, what happens is you've got larger and larger chunks of food going into the stomach, which means more and more hydrochloric acid has to be secreted in order to break down that food. So now what you're doing is you're taking the body and throwing it into even more of an acidic condition. So when you see dogs that are, 4 that look like they're 8 or 9, or you see arthritic conditions, or you see puppies that are having digestive issues, the problem is in most cases it's pretty easily solved by adding in enzymes or maybe perhaps even some probiotics. But I look at so many of the diseases that dogs are facing, and I'm just going, oh my God, these are so easy to fix with food. Because if you know about, the proper amounts of moisture, the proper amounts of fat, the proper amounts of the distribution of supplements, or of enzymes, then all of a sudden you're helping your dog digest their food in such an easier way, and it keeps them healthy longer. And then it also will take a dog that is not well, and it will change their health so quickly it'll blow your mind. I mean, I've seen dogs turn their entire coat around in a week just by being on a little bit different of a breakdown of foods than, what's normally prescribed.
So what if you have a dog who has been sick or needs to regain their health in some way? What kind of diet is best for them?
I'm so glad you asked that. I go back to kind of what I was saying at the beginning. Anytime I have a dog that's out of balance, the first thing I do, again, is look at where was this dog born, where's their lineage from? What food would they have been most naturally eating? And how do I get their diet back to that place? I had a client, we were working with one of our Bernese mountain dogs, and he was pretty off balance. And we needed to get him, we needed to get his diet tweaked. And I just thought, you know what, let's get this dog on some raw lamb. Let's get him on some raw milk. We're going to put enzymes in his food. We'll just keep it really, really, really simple. I mean, in 3 days, the dog just totally turned around. And it was amazing to see, because as I've kind of followed that program of let's follow the lineage, let's see what the dog would naturally eat, let's put it back on its most natural diet, it's amazing to me to see how fast these animals can heal and without medications. Just how easy it is to help them heal just with foods. So I always, trace that back. I mean, obviously, if you have a really sick dog, number 1, consult your veterinarian. Number 2, I'm happy to consult with anybody about how to, to muscle test the body and how to create the best balanced diet for their particular dog. And, I mean, I've worked with everything from, skin issues, eye issues, immune-mediated anemias, which are kind of like a death sentence to a lot of animals. I've worked with cancers. I've worked with tumors. I've worked with, kidney disease and liver disease and all kinds of stomach issues. And it just really blows me away how fast you can heal things with dogs with the right nutrition and the right supplementation.
Okay. I think that probably does it for tonight. I do, unless you have anything you'd like to add.
One thing, just as a part of the overall program that we've been doing, I work a lot with behaviors, and I have a really, really wonderful home study course that teaches you about dog training from the inside out. and that is on my Walk in Sync website, which is walkinsync.com. And if you look on the products page, it is under the home study course. So if you'd like to learn about the real mindset and kind of energy that you want to be embodying to work with your dog, please feel free to check that out. And we also have the Walk in Sync system on there. So if you need any help with your big dog in terms of pulling, or you have a big dog puppy that you want to start off on the right paw, this system is great because there's no choking, and it's really, really easy to use, and the dogs get it really quickly of how to stop pulling on walks, and it keeps your puppy totally safe because there'll never be any choking. So if you'd like any information on that, and you can always contact me as well if you need any information or any kind of consultation with your dog's health or behaviors at info@dogwalkinsync.com.
Okay, well, I think we want to open it up for questions, so we'll take it off record in just a second. Just want to remind everybody that there have been quite a few dog food recalls in the last few months, so please try to stay aware of that. I've noticed a lot of consumers don't really get that information. I don't think the dog food companies are forthcoming. So Big Bark does try to share as much of that information as we can, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me as well. And don't forget, our new website is going to be up soon, and we should have a lot of that information on there, so be on the lookout for that. So we want to open up to your questions. So, Alicia, if you can take us off record.